Hey folks, Dave Temple here. As you know, my podcast is all about talking to some of the best thriller writers in the world. But now, after nearly 2.5 years, I think it's time I toot my own horn. So, with that, I'm offering my thriller, The Poser, for sale. This thriller stars Hollywood detective Patricia Pat Norelli, a rookie cop working the overnight beat when one of Hollywood's biggest stars is found dead in her Hollywood Hills home. The only problem, the star just won an Oscar and is found dead only hours later. Now, Pat sees this as a way to forge her own path and muscles her way into the case. Soon, she and partner Detective Stuart Brown find themselves deep inside a complex case with more questions than answers and a ghost of a killer. Now, this isn't my first self-published book, but it's the first one I'm very confident you're going to like. I'm pretty proud of it. And for the rest of this month, you can get the ebook for only $5.95 or the paperback for $13.95. Now, since I do this weekly podcast as a free service, perhaps you'd consider this a way to help out your fellow thriller author. Okay, here's the link, davidtemplebooks.com/books. Okay, there you'll see The Poser. Just click and you're on your way. Again, the link is davidtemplebooks.com/books. Otherwise, just head over to Amazon. Okay, thanks for your support. And now on with the show. Hello, and welcome to another edition of The Thriller Zone. I'm your host, David Temple. And on today's 46th episode, I'm very excited to welcome Mark Greaney of Sierra 6 fame. The book drops in less than a week. And as you and I both know, the Gray Man series has found an enormous following and huge success. In fact, Ryan Gosling, have you heard? Starring as the Gray Man. There is so much to uncover about this series, and I want you to hear every single bit of it. Also, I got a chance to ask Mark some of the questions that I've often wondered about him. So when you find someone this successful, and you kind of want to know what the secret sauce is, you're going to find out some of that today. We're also going to find out in rapid fire questions just how he how he views life and situations. Let's just leave it at that. Anyway, I'm pretty geeked out, as you can tell. So let's you and I get into the Thriller Zone with Mark Greaney. Welcome to the extravaganza known as the Thriller Zone.
I'm happy to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, I say we just jump into it, and we're going to be talking about this gorgeous 500-page. I'm going to gush a little bit more later, Mark, so maybe I won't do it too much now, but I love this book.
Thank you so much, Dave.
Rarely do you get to find a book, at least I don't, and I'm reading a lot of them for the show, where you start finding yourself squeezing in little times on a very busy schedule where you're like, can I just get in a couple of chapters here?
Yeah.
Maybe a little over here.
Yeah.
And this was one of those.
Well, I love that. That's because that's my experience with books. You're enjoying a book when you just can't, you hate to tear yourself away from it and can't wait to get back.
Yeah. And I know it's a little bit of a cliche, but I start very early in the day, usually about 4:30, 5 o'clock. And some of that's writing time. Some of that's preparation time. If it was a particularly long day the day before, I'll say, honey, you just keep things quiet because I'm grabbing myself a little Mark and we're going to go in the corner and just get busy with Sierra 6. So
awesome. I love hearing that.
And it's dropping, a week from tomorrow?
Correct, the 15th, so a week from tomorrow.
Awesome. And by the way, not to toot this horn too loudly, but this is the perfect birthday gift for me. My birthday's tomorrow, and
all right.
And I'm like, you know what? This is having Mark Greaney on the show is about as good as it gets in my book.
I appreciate that. Happy birthday in advance.
Yeah, turning 40 finally.
No good. I've done that 14 times so far. Working on my 15th.
What do you do to stay in shape? I got to ask that. You look fantastic all the time.
Thanks for saying that. I started working out 3.5 years. I mean, I've kind of always had a gym membership and would do the 3 times a month thing and never really get anywhere. And about 3.5 years ago, July 1st, 2018, I started working out very, very few breaks. And now I have a small gym in my house, and I spent the money to get some nice equipment. And it's a very small gym, but it's got nice stuff. And I make myself do about an hour a day most of the time. And it's mostly just, and also take my dogs to the park. We have a big 100-acre off-leash dog park near where we live. So I do a couple miles a day with the dogs, which helps too.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll admit, and I'm guilty of this maybe perhaps more than I should say, but I do a fair amount of Instagram stalking. Mm-hmm. And I did zoom in on some of your equipment going, that's a nice rack. I mean,
oh yeah. It's really nice, especially for the space that I have. And it's right off my bathroom. And when I was looking at buying this house, I was going like, if my gym's there and I put stuff in it, I'm going to feel like the biggest loser if I walk by it every day and don't work out at all. So it actually has worked to keep me going back to it, because it's like, yeah, I keep looking at it and it's looking at me. I think I should get my workout in.
It's like those years. Were you one of these guys that way back when you got that, whatever that machine was at the day, some kind of a flex something, and you like
the Bowflex?
Yeah, Bowflex.
Yeah.
I'm really going to get on this. And then you go, why is that turned into my hanger for most of my clothes?
That's where all your clothes go to hang. Yeah, no, I couldn't afford a Bowflex. I probably had I had my clothes laying on something more mundane than that, I guess.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. All right. Well, we're covering the fact that I'm a fan, and that you got a hit on your hands. We'll get to Sierra 6, as we said, in just a minute. But man, one of the other biggest pieces of news, and I've been following this for a while, and probably because I spent 3 tours of duty in Los Angeles. Ryan Gosling. How about having Ryan Gosling, one of Hollywood's biggest stars ever, playing the Gray Man on Netflix?
Yeah, it's magnificent. It's still surreal to me, and I've known about it for coming on 2 years, a year and a half, and it's still surreal that it's happening. I originally optioned The Gray Man before it came out in 2009, so it's been bouncing around Hollywood for 12 or 13 years, and in that time, it's gotten kind of close a couple of times, which was always a surprise to me, because I never thought anything would happen with it, other than getting an option. I got some money, and it was a nice feather in your cap to say that your book is in Hollywood, and I figured that's where it would end. But over the years, there was a lot of big actors whose names were being thrown around as they were interested in it. So when it finally came to Ryan Gosling, I heard about that in early 2020, I guess. I made no reaction whatsoever, because I was like, yeah, that is literally the 15th name I've heard in the last 10 years. And I probably will hear another name, a few months later. And then they went forward with it. So I couldn't be more excited. I've read the script and love it. Really good job.
You just brought up 2 quick questions, having dabbled in and around Hollywood, as I said, for so many years. One is, isn't it funny how Hollywood, it isn't, the wheels of Hollywood only turn as fast as the people in power want them to turn, right?
Yeah. That's true. And there's a lot of every time something looked like it was going to happen and it fell apart, it always fell apart for these reasons, like the head of the studio left, or these 2 people had to go work on something else or whatever. There was always this reason where you feel like, oh my gosh, I got so close, but then just life gets in the way. And I think just the stars have to align in an amazing way to get a film made. And it was really almost taken out of my hands when the Russo brothers got involved, and they wrote the screenplay and they directed it. And when I say out of my hands, it was basically like they were shepherding this thing beautifully through, what needed to be done in Hollywood. And I just kind of sat back, because Joe and Anthony Russo, they really enjoyed the story, and they had me come out to California and before they wrote the script and talk to them. And I thought like, wow, this is in really good hands. These guys like my book more than I do. And it made me happy. And everything they said they wanted to do is what's happening now. So it's all been pretty great.
Wow. And for those folks who don't know who Joe and Anthony, they're little independent, tiny little movie guys. You may have heard these little indie films. I think it's called Captain America and Avenger.
Yeah.
To the tune of like, was it $3 billion? I think
Yeah,
those movies.
I know there's a B involved. I don't know how much, but they're doing really well for themselves. And yeah, they wanted to do this even before. I think they had done Winter Soldier when I started talking to them, and but then they were asked to do uh, Endgame, Infinity War, and Endgame, and they got sort of pulled off of the project. But Joe Russo had written a fantastic script, which was kind of hanging out in Hollywood for a few years, and then he went and got his script and got the rights to move forward with it, and here we are.
You have a really healthy attitude. I love the way that you started off by saying, yeah, it sounds good. I'll believe it when I see it. Oh,
Yeah.
really? Fill in the blank. Oh, great. Oh, fill in the blank. Oh, great. Until finally you see it being made, you're like, oh shit, this thing is for real now.
Well, I even thought I was the last naysayer. Everyone else was like jumping for joy, and I was like, "Oh, come on, it's going to fall through. I don't care what they've announced. I don't care what's been on Deadline or Variety. Something's going to happen in this whole thing. A meteor is going to hit the planet before this movie comes out." And then COVID happened, and then they said they were starting the filming back. I mean, COVID had been happening for a while, but they initially were going to start it last January, and then they pushed back like 6 weeks. And I was like walking around everybody going, "I told you, did I call this? They're never going to film this thing." And then once they started filming, and once I started seeing, scenes of helicopters flying over French countryside with machine guns, just like in the book and stuff. And then at that point, you're like, wow, this actually might happen. But yeah, I've always taken it all with a grain of salt because it just seems so incredibly improbable. But happy to be here.
Yeah. Again, a healthy way to look at it. And that was the other part of my question was when you got to see maybe little snippets of it or some kind of in process, you had to have had that. The joy must hit you that going, oh, they have not massacred the book. They've actually integrated my story into what's going to appear on the screen.
Well, I was already confident because I'd read Joe Russo's original script, and I thought it was like, every film is different from a book. And I'm sure there will be some purists that will be like, well, wait, his hair goes to his collar in the book and it's cut shorter, and that will throw them off. But I'm not that kind of a person at all. I want to see the essence of the character and the essence of the story. And they did so much more than that. I mean, it's a really nice recreation, not just of the Gray Man, the first book, but they take some components from later in the stories, because this CR6 is my 11th novel. And they introduce some characters who play big roles later in the series. They go ahead and introduce them in the first one, and they did it brilliantly. If I knew when I wrote The Gray Man that it was going to be part of this big series, I would have done the same thing. But at that point, I was just trying to get published. So it is super surreal to read the script and go like, oh my gosh, that's right out of that scene. But also to see places where they change stuff, and I go, oh, that's really clever. That really kind of closes a bit of a hole that I left in the story. So they were masters at taking the original work and staying true to it and improving upon it.
That's so refreshing to hear because you often hear so many stories of, oh, they took the story and they twisted it up and it's nothing like that. So yeah. I love hearing that. It also reminds me, I think because my wife and I just finished binge watching this weekend Reacher, which is the Lee Child story, as you know.
Yeah.
Have you got a chance to see it yet?
No, I'm just seeing everything on social media about people talking about it, and it sounds pretty promising.
Well, I find it interesting, and you just said something, Mark, that made me think of this, how people get tied up in little details. Like they couldn't see Tom Cruise being Reacher because he was so short. Right. And I kind of get that, having read most of Lee Child's books.
Yeah.
But when you see this new cat, and I'd love to impress you by saying his name, and I can't recall it.
Alan Richardson, something like that. Yeah.
I found myself, I'll admit it, I'm gawking at the guy. I mean, he's a physical specimen, and he, you know, all of a sudden you're like, yeah, that's Reacher right there.
Yeah. There are liberties that stories can take, and then liberties that maybe they shouldn't take. Yeah. And I would agree with someone who says that Jack Reacher's imposing size is an important part of the story. At the same time, I've been standing next to Lee Child a total of 20 minutes in my life, and I've probably seen 5 people come up to him and say, "Hey, Tom Cruise is short," and so I just I feel for him. And at one point, the Gray Man, one of the studios wrote a script where they changed the gender of the hero, the Gray Man, to a female, and they wrote a whole script that way. And I read the script and I thought, wow, this is a really good movie. But if I went and saw it in the theater and it wasn't called The Gray Man, which was still called Gray Man, and the female lead was still named Court Gentry, I wouldn't even recognize it as The Gray Man, because the story was so, not just because they changed the hero from male to female, but the story takes place in Colombia, and mine takes place in Europe. And there were just all these different changes. And at that point, you're like, why even use my story? It's like, do I have so much juice in the industry? And I don't, that you guys need the name of my story to make this big tentpole film. So I never really understood that. But yeah, it's great when the script is close. I look at the directors as artists and the actors as artists and the cinematographers as artists, just like I'm an artist and I put my spin on it in the 100,000 word book. And I don't expect Joe and Anthony Russo's to be like some sort of like audio-visual engineers that will take an exact page of my book and render it on screen. I expect them to be the artists that they are and, do what they think is best for the film thing. And there's going to be fans that are going to be like, wait, this opens differently than the Gray Man does. And honestly, the Gray Man opened in Iraq during the Iraq War with a scene there. And it's like, that wouldn't make any sense whatsoever to open it the same way. But there's going to be absolute purists. I know that because I hear from them on social media all the time, who will feel like it's too much of a departure. But I think it's 80% of the same of book one and elements of other books. And I couldn't be happier about it.
And I also want to remind people who are not in the business, and you're throwing around a whole lot of language, a lot of Hollywood speak there, Mark. I got juice and tentpole. I mean, you're a Hollywood babe, okay? Can you just call my girl and we'll do lunch?
It took 12 years to get here, but no, it's you put me up next to somebody from Hollywood and you recognize that I live in Memphis, Tennessee really quickly.
Well, I'm also thinking of hearing our mutual friend Jack Carr talk about when he finally got to see Terminal List made. And he goes, man, if you'd ever asked me years ago who would be the dream actor and who would be the dream director, and then to see that come to fruition, a couple of things. First of all, kudos to him for living that dream, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
Second of all, and I, a lot of people will accuse me for being maybe a little, overly metaphysical or Pollyanna or woo-woo or whatever the hell you want to call it. But I'm a big proponent of seeing what you want, feeling what you want, and holding it and working toward it. And I get a sense that you are that way, that if you really, it is a heart's desire of yours, and you really do hold it in constant focus as to a dream that you want, I really believe it's kind of bound to happen. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think about it sometimes at this stage in my career that, it's like I look inwardly and I realize like all my ambition is not about selling more books or anything like that. It's just doing better at this thing that I do for a living and wanting the next thing to be better and the next thing to be better than that. Not necessarily bigger, but just better quality. So, I love to write. I forget that a couple of times a year when I'm on deadline and things are going crazy. I mean, I literally kind of have to take a step back, throw some cold water on my face and go, hey, you like writing, remember? And that's why you're getting up and doing this. And, I feel like, everybody that says, you just have to keep working and good things will happen. I feel like you have to keep working at something that you're passionate about for good things to happen, because there was no way I would write a book if I didn't like writing. If I had an idea for a story and I wanted to get paid for it, I could not have written a book. I wrote a book because I like walking around thinking of stories, developing them, writing them out, editing them, like the whole process. And if it wasn't a labor of love, I wouldn't have gotten anywhere in my career. So I always tell people that are trying to get published or whatever, it's like, take a step back, ask yourself if you like doing it. If you like doing it, then just relax about everything else, because there's your reward. And if you get, and then other good things, as you just said, other good things will happen to you if you just keep at it, if you love it.
God, I love what a great soundbite that is. And I mean that in sincerity, because I've talked to so many people, and I've been at this for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of different radio stations and talking to people from all walks of life. And I can spot within seconds who is doing it for the money or the wrong reasons, fill in the blank, and who's doing it out of just pure passion.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's all,
And I'm sorry. I was going to say, I feel like even if you can churn something out, out of a desire to make money, I don't think you can have a career. Like, as far as being a writer, I don't think you could keep going back and developing new things unless you had a passion for it. I hope not. I hope that people, because there's been some people that I know that have had like one big book and then they never really had anything else after that. And then you wonder if that's just, they had that one story in them and they somehow scrounged down and got it out, and there was nothing else. But if you're somebody that really loves what you do, you can replicate it. You have to replicate it.
that is a really fine point, because you hear people talking about, hey, I'm an overnight success. Okay, it took me 10 years, but then I always wonder, and there's a couple of people coming to mind I'll keep my mouth shut on, but I always wonder what that next book will be like. Especially when they've come out of the gate with a mind-blowing success with ginormous money. And look, what you do, what we all try to do, us writers, is no easy task. And anybody who says that it is, I would beg to differ. But I don't know. I don't want to belabor that point, but I think it's interesting that you're echoing a lot of my sentiment, which is you're coming from passion.
Yeah. I mean, it's the only way I know how to do it. I tell people I used to work at Burger King when I was 16 years old. That was a harder job to me than the job that I have now, as far as I'm concerned. Not that I don't work a lot. I write 2 books a year and all the other aspects that come with it, but it is something I like to do. There's a product cycle of every book that I write where it depends on when you catch me. If you interview me a couple months from now, I'll be like, gosh, this is the worst job in the world. But that it only lasts a few weeks. I mean, it's literally as you get deeper into your story and you're committed to telling it this way, and then you're having your reservations. And there's a part in every one of my books where I literally just want to give the advance back, flee the country, and just forget about it. And you just have to just push on past that. And I told myself CR6 is my 21st published novel. So it's like, okay, you've made it happen before. You can do it again. Just take a breather. But yeah, I mean, the passion has to be there.
And do you find it interesting that you are probably single-handedly your worst critic?
Yeah, and I think that's probably healthy overall. Because I mean, the alternative is you walk around so full of yourself, and so I've never been like that. And there's things that I second guess like crazy in these books, and once the reviews start coming in and other people start reading them, and then I'm always like, whew, somehow at the last minute. And a lot of times it is in the editing process where you fix this nagging thing that is there. And I always say this, and it's true, and you probably might know this too. It's like when your book is 98% finished, it's like 0% finished. It's crap because it's like, that there's, where all the bodies are buried, all the things that don't work, that aren't fixed. So it's literally that last 2% is when you have a book. And I'm always like, if I die a week before I turn a book in, they wouldn't be able to publish it. They'd be like, what is this nonsense? It really does take the very last second of connecting dots and putting things together where I can be proud of the thing that I've been working on for 6 months.
Yeah. Whew. And you've done it. Correct me if I'm wrong, and we're going to dig a little bit deeper, and I'm trying to move as quickly as I can, but you've done this in a relatively short amount of time. This has not been a thing that you started like 40 years ago and you're finally starting to hit it,
Yeah. Yes and no. I actually spent 15 years writing my first book. I started it when I was 22 and I finished it when I was 37. And it wasn't that it took 15 years to write. It was that I was just picking it up and putting it down. And I had an idea for a story, and I never really believed that anything would happen with it, but it was fun to do. And as I wrote it, I got more and more passionate. And finally, I finished it in 2005. And then I wrote my second book, and I never even sent that to an agent or anything. I did nothing with it. And then I wrote my second book like in 7 months, because once you've done it, I always say everything is cheapened by my ability to do it. Everything that I think is like so impossible is like, once I've done it, it's like, oh, well, I did it. It can't be that hard. So then I just started cranking out another book and another book. And Gray Man was my fourth novel that I finished. But, I got published when I was 42. I'm 54 now. So I've been at this 12 years. But I wanted to be a writer for 20 years before I was published. I just wasn't, working the right way or working hard enough.
Wow. Good for you. We're going to jump into CR6 in a quick second, but there's something else that you have done that I'm a huge fan of. Again, referencing radio. I grew up wanting to be in radio. It was one of the dreams I finally achieved, and I always loved radio drama, which was way before my time even in radio theater. And so you're bringing that back with your series, Armored series on Audible, which was released at the end of last year. And I have a tiny little sample. Is it okay if I play that for us?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
We got enemy fix in pursuit. I'm moving to the back to cover Tabby with Ken's body armor. I'll engage out the back window. Try to keep the pursuers back, and I'll call it in. Just drive and report anything you see. Okay. Op Center, Bravo 6, we are taking fire time now. Panther is KIA. Repeat, Panther KIA. BNR. Request immediate QRF and cows it back to the intersection of Rafika Riri and Clemenceau. What the fuck is chasing us? Panther's dead.
Bravo 6, Op Center copies all. Understand Panther KIA and body not recovered. I have you geolocated on Al Ibrahim, moving east at speed.
That's affirmed. We have Tabby and are en route to Rally Point.
That is superbly done.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I wrote the words, and it was hard. I thought it was hard to do to get all the sound cues and all these things. It's an audio play, so it's like a screenplay, but everything has to be done with audio references.
Sure.
But when I turned it in, I had no idea what they were going to do with it, honestly. And I was up at Audible's in New Jersey for a pre-production meeting, and they were like, well, you've given us quite a few challenges. There's a lot of characters here, and there's 13 different Mexican characters, and I was like, I'm a writer. I can put my stories on the moon or whatever. I don't know any different. And they were excited by the story though. And once I heard the first snippets, which I didn't even hear till about 3 weeks before it was released in December, I was like so happy to hear it. It is kind of a different medium, and it's not necessarily what everybody expects, but anybody that listens to the sample before getting it on Audible should know what to expect, because it's a 5.5 hour play, and it's all audio. And I think there's 27 characters, or different actors and actresses that they use for it, sound effects, music, everything. And I'm really happy with how it turned out.
Well, kudos to you. I did one of my first novels, The Poser, and I did the audiobook myself, read that, and then I did the audio design, and I did a similar thing. I only kind of interspersed it with nuance. You're really a full-on play, so everything really is as though you need to watch the film without your eyes, and superbly done.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It was actually Audible came to me a few years ago and said they had this new medium, they're trying to develop it, and they wanted to know if I had something. So I had this failed screenplay that I've been working on forever and was bloated, and it was a mess, but I really thought the story was interesting. It was about these private military contractors from America who are lost up in the Sierra Madre mountains of Mexico and surrounded by drug cartels and a lot of double crossing and political stuff going on. So I had that idea, and I went to them. I was like, listen, I will do your audio play if you like this story, if you like where I'm going with this, because this is the idea that I want to flesh out right now. And it, they agreed. And then I wrote it over a couple of years, and I actually optioned the audio play to Sony Pictures with Michael Bay to produce. And so I've got that in Hollywood as well. I have a novelized version of it, kind of a bigger expanded story coming out as well in July.
Well, yeah, you jumped me there. I was going to say Michael Bay and Erwin Stoff, who are, let's see, Michael Bay is Armageddon and Transformers, and Erwin was the Matrix. So once again, your work is in the best hands it could possibly be.
I know. I'm so happy. I'm waiting for them to write the screenplay for that and to see if that can get some traction. And honestly, if it takes 13 years like The Gray Man did, I'm still happy with that. If it takes 25 years, I'm still happy with that.
You know, when I first, it's all about you, but I'm going to take a slight departure because when I decided I really wanted to write, and I was still in radio, I tried to figure out who would be the guy that I most wanted to be like, and it was Michael Crichton.
Oh wow, yeah, sure.
Because Michael Crichton was doing it the exact way I want to do it. He was writing the stories, then he was converting to screenplay, then he was executive producing. So he was double and triple and quadruple dipping, right? But he was the mastermind behind it all.
Yeah, and I mean, if you talk about Crichton, his books are just all so different. They're all so good, and they're all so different. And he has the only books in my life that I've ever read the entire book in one day. I'm not a fast reader, but Sphere, I read that in one day. And I think, is it Rising Sun? Is that the one about? It's the one they made a movie with Sean Connery and like Wesley Snipes or something.
Yes.
I feel it was called Rising Sun. But yeah, gosh, I'm a huge Michael Crichton fan. We lost him way too early, unfortunately.
Way too early. So my real point to that is, and I'm pivoting off of, and yes, Rising Sun, Sean Connery, Wesley Snipes, Harvey Keitel. Oh, that was such a good movie.
Yeah.
And this is that you're like, in my opinion, which is probably why the fanboy in me kicks out, is like, since Michael's not around, you're the guy that I kind of most want to live my life after. Because I mean, I know that sounds kind of whatever, but you're doing the exact thing that I dream of. And I without goofing off here, do you find yourself every once in a while? You have to find yourself every once in a while just kind of waking up, pinching yourself, going, "Is this really happening to me?" I mean.
Yeah, that happens a lot, and it happens in kind of weird ways and weird stages. And I worked with Tom Clancy on his last 3 books, and then wrote 4 more Jack Ryan books over a space of a few years. So I wrote 7 books in 6 years, and I did my last Clancy book in the end of 2016 is when it came out, and that's 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And I look back now, and I'm like, did that really happen? Like, literally, did I imagine that whole thing? It's like, how did I get that Clancy thing? So I don't walk around going like I build and build and build. It's sort of like, wait, I did that thing a few years ago. That's so weird. It's like, it's still incredible because Clancy was my favorite author and my dad's favorite author. And it was so, that's just one example. And the film is like something that you just sort of like remember is happening. My wife is fascinated by the fact that it's not really part of our life. We don't talk about it that much. And then someone will say something about it. She's like, yeah, it's so weird, because I'll be like, oh yeah, there's that movie, and they just saw some video from it. It was released by Netflix this week. And so we're talking about it this week, but it's not part of every day.
I saw on, I think it was on audible.com when I was researching your audiobook or this radio play, and I saw you referencing all of Tom's books, and I thought, how many people walking the planet get a chance to do that? And that was part of that thing that triggered my thinking of like, he's got to just wake up every once in a while and going, who the hell am I? You know what I mean?
The first time I was in Tom Clancy's office, I was sitting there with him, and he was talking about jets, engines that the Chinese were buying from the French for their fighter planes or something like that. And I remember going, this is just one little moment in my life, but it's like, it is not lost on me how surreal this is. I'm sitting in Tom Clancy's office with his ball caps on the wall and everything else. He's at his desk, and I'm sitting in front of him, and we're talking about things that I enjoyed reading about in Clancy novels. And, it was just a very, very surreal experience.
It reminds me of something I'm always saying to my wife when we're in a really cool situation. There's just something magical happening. I'm going, I want you to make sure you stop and you take a little moment to step outside yourself and observe this, because this is going to be one of those things that you're going to remember later.
Yeah.
And we do it all the time, and we're constantly doing. Do you remember that one moment that so and so? And it's I think it's just part of those little jewels of life, you know.
Yeah. It's last fall I got the amazing opportunity to fly backseat in an F-18 fighter plane with the U.S. Naval Reserve, and it was the coolest thing I've ever done, of course. And it's a 90-minute flight or something, and we're going Mach 1, and we're doing all sorts of different things. And I was in the plane going, I'm never going to get to do this again. This is, it's like, it's so sad. This is my one shot. And then it's like, wait, this is your shot. This is your moment. You have to enjoy it and stop lamenting the fact that you can't do it tomorrow morning. It's like, you just have to appreciate it when it happens.
Isn't that funny? And isn't that such a human thing to do? Oh my God, I'm right here in this. And tomorrow I won't be able. Well, be there now.
Yeah, exactly. Don't look through your camera the whole time. Actually experience what it is that you're doing or seeing.
Yeah, don't get me started with this whole you're at an event and you're doing all this stuff. Well, I'm like, why don't you just stop and enjoy the moment that you can find this duplicated somewhere else?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel the same way.
Speaking of that F-18, and I love the way that you do research, and we always kind of joke, oh, I had to take this trip to do research. But I mean, you're shooting rifles on faux battlefields. You're in training with some of the best. And, I was asking myself, I wonder if Mark snuck in a cameo appearance in Armored. Did you by any chance?
Oh, audio? No, God, that would have been neat. Although I don't, my voice, like when they first said they were going to adapt my books for audiobook, I was like, I don't have to read them, do I? Because that's not my forte. And honestly, this is just a fascinating thing about Armored. I looked up some of the actors to see what other things they had done. And there's a character in the play who goes, his nickname is NASCAR. He's from Alabama. He's like a former NASCAR driver, and he's the driver on one of these gun trucks. And he has the most Southern accent. I wrote him very Alabama country boy or whatever. The guy who plays him in Armored, you look at his credits, and he played King George in Hamilton, in the Chicago production of Hamilton. And it just blows my mind that actors have this ability to be one thing and then to be something else. And that's not something that I have. So I did not do a cameo because I didn't want to cheapen the product, I guess. I'll let the professionals do that.
Oh, man. Yeah, I can see that now. You want to. Let's get into Sierra 6, this 500-page thrill-a-minute novel. And there's so many things. I wonder if you'd do me this favor so that I am careful not to spoil it. Can you give me a little tiny synopsis of it?
Sure. It's this is the first book that there's really two timelines in the story. 12 years ago, my hero, Court Gentry, was a young CIA officer who is pulled into a paramilitary unit almost against his will to go to Pakistan to try and stop a terrorist from detonating what are called RDDs, or dirty bombs, radioactive dispersal device, against coalition forces. So that's 12 years ago in the past. But you also see him in the present. It goes back and forth in the present, where he has just come across a ghost from that really horrible mission that he was on 12 years ago. And that sends him on kind of a race against time to try and stop an even bigger attack in the present. So you see him as a young, kind of cocky paramilitary. And then you see him now, 12 years later. He's older, he's wiser, he's a freelance intelligence asset, I guess. And the two stories are woven together, and there's two ticking clocks, and there's two totally different plots, two sets of characters along with the hero. And it's a wild ride with a ton of intrigue and a very personal story for the hero, Court Gentry, which I think is super important in these type of books. Is like, don't make everything so macro or geopolitical that you lose the personal stakes of the story. So that's all in there as well.
couple of things that I really loved about it was that very fact. I felt like I was getting to know a guy who was on a mission and doing this thing, but I was getting to know him and I got to watch him grow up.
Yeah, yeah.
What made you decide to do two parallel universes simultaneously, which I loved? And at first it took me a second. I'm like, well, but once you get in the rhythm, it's brilliant. It's like you're reading two books at the same time. Did your publisher, I'm asking you a lot of stuff right away. Did your publisher go, you want to do what?
Well, I did have a conversation with my editor because I'd always talked about maybe doing an origin story and showing early gray man stuff. But the problem with that was what are the stakes, and going back in the past, something that you've already alluded to and fleshing that out in a book. There's really no stakes. People that have read the series are going to know that the hero survives or whatever. So, but I like the idea of showing snippets from his past. So I thought about, well, what if there's something in his past that relates to something in the present? So I talked to my editor about it, and he warned me. And I didn't quite get him at the time, but I learned really quickly what he was talking about. He said, you can't, whichever timeline, the past or the present, they have to be semi-equal. Otherwise, you're going to go 200 pages without talking about, the setup in the past, and people are going to sort of not follow that very well. So I was like, yeah, okay. So once I started working on it, I was like, oh my gosh, he wasn't kidding. So the book, like all my books, is pretty long. It's 165,000 words, and it's essentially two 82,000 word novels woven into one. Then everything relates. So you'll see something that happened in the past, and then in the present, there's something that's relevant to that. But it was something that I did have this conversation with my editor, and he's like, okay, that's a cool idea, but here's the pitfalls you're going to come into. And then I had to kind of discover that for myself again, that he was right.
Well, and for those who have not read Mark, or maybe you're in the process of picking this book up, or you're thinking to yourself, maybe you're a gal and you're thinking it's a dude's book. I say au contraire, because there are not one, but two love stories that are intertwined within. So that was a really nice touch, and it wasn't overdone or syrupy or gooey. It was just
thank you,
really heartfelt. And it also made me go, I wonder if Mark's a romantic.
Well, no, I think I'm in I think I write the genre that's best for me. But I do like, any story you write, whatever the genre, it's all about the human condition. So I don't just want to have guys, aiming their sniper rifles for 500 pages. There has to be a lot more. And when I'm portraying my hero, Court Gentry, as a young man, a 25-year-old man who has been trained up his entire life for what he does for a living, but the rest of the world is a little bit of a mystery to him. He's not James Bond. He's not suave and debonair. He's just befuddled by women, the little bit of experience he has. And yeah, he meets this young woman who also works for the CIA. And their relationship is unique for a number of reasons, and not the biggest or the smallest is that they're in Afghanistan trying to stop a terrorist over the border in Pakistan. But yeah, I wanted to show a 25-year-old guy with 15 things going on meeting a young woman, and the two of them have some shared experiences and shared interests, and see where that goes.
Mission accomplished. And I wasn't, by the way, inferring that you should to branch off and do romance. I'm not saying that, but it does take a certain kind of guy to be able to tap into the romantic side of oneself, in order to pull certain members of the audience and or a pollinization of that audience to go, oh, so you've got shoot 'em up, bang bang, and the guy's a real dude trying to figure out girls, because he was clearly moderately inept.
Yeah. I'd written him that way. He just doesn't. He worked in a shoot house that his dad ran, training police and law enforcement, other SWAT units and stuff since he was a kid, since he was could walk. Basically, he's had some involvement in that world, and really no involvement in any other world. He's in my story. He's pulled into the CIA when he's 20 years old or 19 years old, and I wanted to show, it wouldn't make sense for him to have all of the skills, the tactical skills, the martial skills, the tradescraft skills, and by the way, he's also, suave and debonair. Like, when did he
Sure.
learn that?
Yeah.
When did he learn that stuff? And so I wanted to, portray that. All these books are over the top in some way, but it's the author's job to work their butt off to sell it and make it feel real.
Yeah.
And so, a 25-year-old guy in that situation might very well find himself in that situation with women as well.
Yeah. Well, and you just referenced kind of what James Bond, that whole series was really kind of based upon. And I read something maybe this morning, perhaps through your Wikipedia page, something to the tune of I know what it is. They're seeing the gal from the last James Bond movie pop up, and I'm trying to think of her name. It's a 3-word name. And they were seeing her coming up in this new Gray Man, and they thought, oh, I'm having a Jones for some James Bond.
Oh yeah, Ana de Armas. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. She was adorable.
Yeah, and she's going to be great in the Gray Man. Her character is really, really cool. So I read the script, so I know.
Good for you. All right. We're running out of time, and I want to be able to squeeze in my rapid fire questions. If you haven't heard about that, that's a lot of fun. So that's coming up. But I want to ask this, and I have to ask this. It's not pure fanboy, because it's so many of my listeners and viewers are writers themselves. And I know you're asked this a lot, I'm sure, but it's something that so many of them, many of whom are trying to find this journey for themselves, love to hear a successful writer's advice. So I heard you say somewhere that your best piece of advice was, the gist of it being to complete something. But can you take that one step further and tell my audience your best piece of advice you could give them?
Yeah, I mean, advice is always, has to be geared towards where the writer is on the journey. Because I'll have people come up to me and they're like, "Yeah, I'm a writer. I can't think of anything to write about." And I'm like, I can't help you there. Or sometimes they'll be at the stage like, I have 2 finished manuscripts, and how do I get an agent? That's another piece of advice. But my overall general thing, the thing that helped me the most when I was, working a day job in a cubicle and dreaming of being an author, was I had this book. As I said, it took me 15 years to write. About 10 years into that, or 11, 12 years into that, I was still a million miles from being completed. I just put it aside, and I wrote a novella. I just had an idea for a story. It turned out to be a 100-page story, but I wrote the beginning, the middle, the end. Every time I got to a roadblock, I found a way through it, or a speed bump, I found a way over it, and I edited it, got it as good as I could. And then I did another, and then I did another. And it just sort of struck me that once I went back to the novel, it's like, okay, I've told a complete story before. Because what happens is people will write the easy parts of a book, and then they'll go write the easy parts of another book, or go write the easy parts of another book. And when they get these hurdles in front of them, it seems to me, because I have conversations with these people a lot, they'll move on to something else. And, your objective isn't to have 15 incomplete stories. You're never going to get anywhere with that. So you have to learn every part of the craft. You can't just have a cool idea. You can't just know how to write. You need both of those things. And then you also need to know how to edit. And you also need to know how to get over these roadblocks. But, encouragement that I give people is like, there's a million people that want to be writers. There's probably 100,000 that pick up a pen or open their laptop. There's probably 50,000 that write more than 10 chapters. And there's probably 10,000 that write, 80% of a book. And there's 2,000 that write a book, and there's 100 that get published because they did all the job editing it. And I say all that to say, every time you come up to one of these speed bumps, I mean, they're all great reasons to quit, because you're like, what do I do now? But if you can manage to find your way over that speed bump, you just left 100,000 people in the dust, and you're getting more rarefied the further you keep going. So I feel like even if it's a short story or anything, start it, complete it, edit it, make it as perfect as you can, do what they always tell you to do, put it aside for a while, work on something else, go back to it, look at it with fresh eyes. So that whole process, if you can do it on a small scale, you can do it on a larger scale. So I think I wrote 3 novellas. I just had little ideas for stories. And then I went back to my novel, and it was just so much more doable at that point. And I'd spent a lot of time spinning my wheels before I'd actually completed something.
And I would be remiss if I didn't ask this adjoining question. And I know your very first submission to an agent, if I recall correctly, kind of went. So
Yeah.
Describe to me in my audience that moment when all of a sudden you handed a product in, whether query or otherwise, and they went, oh yeah, this will work, or we can do something with that.
Yeah, well, I'm glad this isn't the lightning round because it's a long story, but I can give you the 15-second version. I met an agent after I finished my second book, and he was going to be at a writer's conference and would read 10 pages of, what someone's submission.
Sure.
So he read it and he loved it. But when I told him the rest of the story, his eyes kind of glazed over, and he said, yeah, that's probably a little too ambitious for somebody that's never been published, but I like your writing, stay in touch. So I wrote a whole nother book, gave it to him, and he came back to me. He's like, you're on the right track, but this doesn't really work. And then I wrote a whole nother book. And then it was actually the 4th book where he read it and he's like, okay, I might be able to sell this. And everything was very sort of couched into we'll see. And he sent it out to 10 publishers, and 9 publishers turned it down, and the 10th picked it up. And that publisher is still my publisher to this day. And that agent is still my agent to this day. So, we all kind of, they took a gamble on me. I was looking for anybody that would represent me or anybody that would publish me, but they took a gamble on me. And so fortunately, I'm really happy that it's paid off for all of us.
Paid off indeed, and then some. Wow, what a great story. Okay. And a great encouragement to just keep going.
Yeah. And the other thing I say is, at this day and age, I think it's like the American idolization of the U.S. or something. Like everybody feels like there's a shortcut. Every day I could open my email now and read you somebody that just wants, to buy me coffee or something and talk to me, and it's all just like to get access to my agent or publisher or some sort of secret sauce. And when I was a writer, I wasn't like seeking out other writers to get a leg up or something. There's just, when I explain to these people that I have my own books that haven't been published, but then they realize I can't necessarily get you published just because you know me. But what I tell people is, it's just, I didn't know anybody who was an author. I didn't know anybody who knew anybody who was an author. I just wanted to be a writer, and I just worked and enjoyed doing it, but I worked at it. So there's not a secret handshake to get published. It's not a racket against you. If an agent thinks they can make money off of you, if they think you'll make enough money to where 15% of it is significant to them, they will represent you. There's no secret to it. There's no secret sauce to it. So it's tough to get published, but if you walk around with a chip on your shoulder thinking like it's impossible and you can't do it, it's like, as I said, I didn't know anybody who was a published author when I became a published author. So it's all about that work that you turn into them. If it has the quality that they want, they will publish you.
Excellent. All right, as we are running out of time, Mark, and I want to be respectful of your time, we do need to squeeze in some rapid fire questions because they're just fun. I'm going to start you off with a layup. What's the one item, the one piece of technology, a weapon, a tool, besides your cell phone, that you can't live without on a daily basis?
Oh, me personally?
Yeah, you.
Oh, okay. I mean, it's got to be my laptop. I mean, I write all day, every day, and I use it. I mean, I'd love to say my Glock 19 or my 6-hour pistol that I'm wearing now, but it's not that sexy. It's my laptop because I use it to make a living, and I use it to communicate, and I use it to talk to you. And it is never more than 100 feet away from me at any point in my life. So yeah, nothing more exciting than that.
And you're actually wearing a cig right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
I was trying to think.
You're in your house, right?
Yeah, I'm actually in my brother's house. We've had a power out. We had a big ice storm the other day, and my power's been out for like 5 days. So my brother lives close by, and he's got power. So here we are.
Oh, wow. One word for you, generator.
Yeah, I have a generator at my house. It is poorly. It is attached poorly. It is powering things I don't need and not powering things I do need, like the internet. So
Yeah.
we got to get that tweaked.
I learned long ago living in Los Angeles with earthquakes, you needed to
Yeah.
power your fridge and your internet. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Question number 2 on rapid fire questions. Hollywood loved your Gray Man movie starring Ryan Gosling on Netflix so much, Mark, that they want to turn Sierra 6 into a TV series, but with one caveat, or shall I say requirement. You must play a character in the series. So the question is, which character in Sierra 6 will you play and why?
I would play Matthew Hanley. He is Court's handler. He's older than Court, as I would be, and he's a smart, interesting guy. He doesn't have the perfect moral compass. I'd like to think I do, but I think that would be an interesting character to play. And Hanley is of the right age, and he doesn't have to like climb up fences and jump off buildings like some of the other characters in the story do. So, I mean, my spine would love for me to play Matt Hanley, because he is sitting on the 7th floor of CIA or something like that. And I think that's a doable character for me.
Your spine thanks you. That's good.
Yeah.
Okay, it's morning, your alarm has gone off, and you've woken up not in your current lovely Memphis home, but a tired old apartment, and you're about to head into work as a bartender, one of your former jobs. What's the one thing that you miss most about that old job of yours, and what's the best lesson that you learned that you currently carry into your current life as a bartender?
Oh, that's a great question. No one's ever asked me that. It's an easy answer though for me. That's a layup. The people that I was around. When you're a writer, you're by yourself all day. I work at home, so my wife is there, and I have an editor and an agent and people I talk to. But that camaraderie of just being young and being with a bunch of the same people all the time. If you love them or you hate them, it still just becomes a family, and I miss that a lot. And the thing that I took away from it that I carry with me is just it's just a way of dealing with people. I feel like everybody should be in retail or the service industry or something at some point in their life, because then you see how it is. And if I've ever in my life seen somebody who's not polite to a server or whatever, that tells me everything I need to know about that character, their character. And then a lot of times you'll be at a restaurant and the service isn't that good, and I'll look around and I'll be like, yeah, she's got 5 tables right now and they just double set her. And it's just like you kind of know this whole thing. You can read the room really, really quickly and realize it's not their fault. But I think character-wise, it's really important to know how to deal with all sorts of people. And your job is to make sure their evening goes off without a hitch, because they're spending their hard-earned money. And I think that can be parlayed into other trades and aspects of life.
Absolutely. Great answer. And you're so right. Not only can you tell a lot about a person by how they treat the service, the help, but also how they tip them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Do you think they're doing this because they just love your snappy or,
Yeah,
attitude?
we used to always say that it was the kiss of death if somebody was like too nice to you, because it's like that's in lieu of a tip. Like while you're waiting on them, they're just so gushingly friendly with you. You're like, that's the kiss of death. We're going to get a bad tip because this is how they think they're paying for us. So it's nice if you're nice to people and tip them well. Those two things.
Yeah. Kind of goes hand in hand.
Yeah.
All right. Number 4, you and your wife, Mark, are joining me and my wife, Tammy, for a lovely dinner at our home here in San Diego. Now, in order to make the evening even more interesting, if that's even possible, we want you to invite 2 people to join us whom you think would add a great deal to our evening. They can come from any background. They can be living or dead. Who are they and why? So it's you 2, us 2, and 2 extra. Anybody you'd love to have us?
Not to get political, but there was a political commentator who passed away a few years ago named Charles Krauthammer. And I read every column he did for the longest time. Conservative, but a very empathetic, just a wonderful, wonderful man. And so people say, like, who would you love to have a conversation with that you haven't? And I would say Charles Krauthammer. And I would also say Jason Isbell. He's a musician, Americana music. He's like absolutely my favorite musician. And I follow him on Twitter and all this other stuff. And, he's just like, he followed me back on Twitter, and I was like squealing like a schoolgirl. I was so excited. But he's a super interesting guy, and there's not a better writer of anything than Jason Isbell. So I would have those two people who probably wouldn't have a ton in common with each other, but I bet everybody we'd all get along and we'd all have a great time.
It's all about really good conversation, right?
Yeah.
And if you follow me back, I promise I'll squeal like a girl and send you an audio copy of it.
I can make that happen. That's easy.
All right, Mark, last one. What's one piece of advice someone from your past gave you, kind of similar to what we've done, but someone gave you a piece of advice that you still live by today? It could be your dad, anybody.
Yeah. My dad was a journalist. He was the head of the local NBC affiliate TV station here in Memphis, and super impactful person in my life. Wonderful guy. He passed away before I ever got published, before I even finished the first unpublished novel. So he never saw any of this, but we were both big fans of reading, and he knew that I wanted to be a writer. And he told me, and this came from journalism, he told me, because I was talking about getting information to write books, like where do you get information from? And he told me, you'll be surprised by how much people like to talk. If you talk to people and ask them, it's like a reporter goes up to interview somebody, and me as a writer, I'll go up and ask somebody, and I'll get the non-classified version if I'm talking to somebody at the Pentagon or CIA or something like that. But people love to talk, and that's something I take with me all the time, because I have a little social anxiety about asking people things. And somebody will be like, well, I can hook you up with this guy who was a pilot in Afghanistan and this happened. And I don't really want to reach out to them. But then I think to myself, my dad was right, because I've tested this 1,000 times, and people do like to talk. And, if you're an author trying to research something, just go to a primary source and see if they'll talk to you. And I've had a few times where people are like, yeah, no, sorry, I can't even communicate with somebody that's going to write about it. But 85% of the time, it's really successful. And I use that mantra all the time, that people want to talk. You just have to go ask.
That's great advice. And I think this, Mark, see if you agree, is that sometimes we're afraid that we're going to impinge on their time, or we're afraid that they're too busy for us. But in reality, we don't know what life is like sitting in their chair. And sometimes I always go on the thinking, all you can do is say no. And all you can do is say, look, I'm too busy right now, but I can talk later. But 99 times out of 100, they'll go, yeah, sure. Yeah, come on down. Yeah. Talk to me.
Yeah.
So I agree with you totally.
Absolutely.
All right, folks, to learn more, go to his website, markgreaneybooks.com. You can follow him on Twitter, which we all do, at Mark Greaney Book without the S. And then Instagram and Facebook is Mark Greaney Books. I'm assuming that's no S on the Twitters because you ran out of
characters. Yeah, I couldn't buy an S.
Hey, here's a little known fact too. When I was researching who to build my website, because I used to build websites, and I learned a long time ago, phooey balooey, let somebody else do it, because you'll just spend your whole life doing it. Your website and Brad Taylor's got my attention. I don't know how that happened, and you're with the same company. Yeah. They now built mine, and big kudos. Yeah.
Oh yeah, terrific. Yeah, no, and I went to Brad because I liked his website several years ago now, like 7-8 years ago. And I said, what do you think of them? And he's like, yeah, I like them. So I have the same company because of Brad.
Awesome. Insert plug here. Thank you, Author Bites.
Author Bites, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Mark, this has been absolutely delightful. I hope I didn't fanboy on you too much.
No, I enjoyed it. I appreciate it. This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks again to Mark Greaney for joining the show today. What an honor to have such a talent on the show. Now, moving on to next week's podcast, my special guest and Bronze Star decorated veteran of the Iraq War will be J.B. Stevens. a crime fiction junkie who's found success publishing on websites and in magazines and anthologies. So please make plans to join JB and me as we discuss his short story compilation releasing this month called A Therapeutic Death. That's next time, right here on The Thriller Zone.